This podcast and every other podcast I make is supported by Patreon. If you want to throw the Patreon $1, you'd be helping to support these relatively niche shows that I intend to be very educational and informative about the games industry, talking to a lot of very cool people. But there are other memberships that include some special bonuses too, such as completely unedited Q&As, ad-free versions of content, unedited versions of shows, and even the ability to play games with me. So if you want to support some independent games industry podcasts, check out the link in the description. Hello everyone, I'm Alanah and welcome to another episode of Video Game Writing 101. This is Josh Sawyer. Josh, for anyone who doesn't know you, who are you and what do you do?
I am the studio design director at Obsidian Entertainment, and I was the director on Pentiment. And before that, many years ago, I started at Black Isle Studios, where I worked on Icewind Dale 1 and 2. After that, I was at Obsidian, where I worked on Neverwinter Nights 2, and I directed Fallout New Vegas and Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2.
Say your actual title at the studio again?
I'm the studio design director.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, it's I'm basically the advisor with all the other teams with anything that relates to design. So I'm not like the king of design, but at any point where my opinion is requested or desired, I will give my opinion and feedback on anything from hiring processes, the tests that we administer, to writing standards or a system design, whatever is necessary. So yeah, I advise the other teams on design matters, but I spend most of my day to day doing directing my own games.
Yeah, so recently, obviously, Pentiment came out.
Yes.
Congratulations. It's awesome and seems to have been very well received in reviews.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very happy.
What were you expecting the reception to be? It's such a unique game. Did you have any idea how it was going to do critically?
You know, I would be lying to say I had no idea, but I've been doing this a while, and so I have a general sense. And with this game, I had a general sense that some people were going to really love it. Mm-hmm. And some other proportion of people were not going to like it at all. And it's with a game like New Vegas, I have a better idea of like, I think most people are going to think this is fine.
Wait, that's what you thought of New Vegas?
When it came out, yeah.
Wow, that's funny.
If you look back at the history of it, it was not that well received when it came out. But anywho, Pentiment, there was a stronger sense I had that there were some people who played it who were like, I love this. This is exactly the game I want to play. I love this. And then there were other people who were like, this is not really my thing. Either they're like, I don't like narrative games. I don't like games with no VO. I just like different types of games, whatever it was, or like, I think your writing stinks, whatever it was. Like, there were some people who
say that?
No, I didn't see people say that.
Okay,
but
I'd be very surprised.
But you know, it's always a possibility. So I guess the thing is, going into it, I was not sure what the proportion was going to be. I thought that maybe it would be like 30% of reviewers are like, this is awesome, and then 70% are like, no, thank you. So yeah, I was pretty pleased. You know, there are people who, or reviewers at least, and certainly obviously gamers, who don't fundamentally like the game or think that the execution was off, and that's totally fair. But for the people that loved it, great, love it.
They'll take it.
Yeah, exactly.
So for anyone who's watching who maybe doesn't know, what exactly is Pentiment? How do you describe it? Well,
the very simple version is Night in the Woods meets Name of the Rose.
Ooh, that's really good.
And it really was inspired by both of those things very heavily. But in more detail, it is a narrative adventure game, and it's set in 16th century Bavaria, which is part of the Holy Roman Empire, what we would today call Germany. And you play an artist, a journeyman artist named Andreas Mahler, and you are a professional artist ending their Wanderjahre, their wandering years, where they study and work at different places before becoming a master. And he spends his last few months working at a Benedictine abbey called Kiersau. And while he is working there, he befriends an older monk who is a painter named Brother Piero. And unfortunately, during his time there, there is a murder of an important nobleman, and the abbot blames Piero for the murder, even though it's pretty obvious that he couldn't have done it. And Andreas is like, well, I'm going to set out to prove that somebody else did it. And that starts a series of investigations and murders that take place over 25 years, during which time Andreas and Tassing and Kearsaw change a whole bunch.
So when it came to writing this game, did you already have the knowledge of all of the history? Is this something that you were already interested in?
I downloaded every piece of historical data into my brain. No.
Well, I was going to ask though, like when it comes to writing something like this, and for any of the writers on the team, like where do they start with it? I mean, it feels very historically accurate. I can't fact
thank
check.
You.
But,
so I have a degree in history. I went to school. I went to school for music and then switched. And then exactly. Many such cases. And I got a degree in history focusing on the Holy Roman Empire in the early modern period. So 15th, 16th century. And that always kind of stayed with me. And I maintained an interest in it. Like a lot of the books that I still read, I don't read that much fiction. I usually will just get history books about things that I think are interesting. And so I did have some information coming into it, but I did a lot more research while working on the game, both scholarly articles and historical manuscripts and history books. And we had 3 historical consultants that we worked with as well. So 3 PhDs who are all experts in their fields. And anytime I reached the end of my academic rope, I would just, please tell me what am I missing? Like, is there a source that I can look at? Is there something I can see that can help me out of this? And they always came through. So it was great.
When you're preparing that information to give to a team in an easily digestible way, what does that look like? Did you have somebody who was making a bunch of documents about certain historical figures and places? Like, how?
Yeah, it's I think you have to be careful because the thing is, as a director, or in my case, a director who's also the head of the writing team, you can't just dump a million gallons of information on people and expect them to absorb that.
Anything that I've learned is that people won't read the things you write, which as a writer is a bit of a bummer.
Yes. So what I always try to do is play to the strengths of the people that are on my writing team. So in this case, over the course of the project, we had a total of 4 writers, including myself. At any given time, we had 2 or 3 total, just because of people moving around and doing other things. So a high degree of mentorship helped a lot because I was able to just give the direct feedback about like this historical thing or that historical thing. There were some things that were easier than others. So for example, Kate Dollarhide, who I just is an incredible writer, and I was so happy I got to work with her again on this project, but she doesn't really have much historical knowledge. And I focused her on the peasantry largely because the peasants also don't have, they're not like super educated. They don't have all the sophistication of the monastic people or the university students and things like that. So for her, I wanted her to draw a wider variety of characters that were more grounded in their material reality. That is, we're starving or we're being taxed or whatever. And I gave her that historical context, which is not only very important to the time period, but it's very important to the actual story that's going on. It is about these people kind of suffering and
that's kind of the opening, right? Your first conflict is, hey, we need more money.
We need more money. Yeah. Yes, very right away. Yeah. So I gave her all that context and worked with her on that. And then we also had another writer on the staff who was a medievalist, and she actually taught Latin, and so she did a lot of like the Latin documentation and wrote some of the more like educated characters. And that was Zoe Franznick. And then Merton Radisep, he lives in Europe and works in Europe, and so he could bring some of his expertise about just the actual landscape, because the rest of us are just Americans. And so I just try to play to the strengths of the writers and also what they show an interest in writing, because if they show an interest in it, they're probably going to do a little bit of digging on their own. And of course, if anyone asks me for sources, I can give it to them or find out. So there would be cases where Kate or I or Zoe or Merton would kind of go like, what would be happening here? And I'd either do the research or I would ask one of the consultants, and then I would pass on the information to the writer. So
So it's not like you were doing all of it at once. It was a process of, I assume, writers' rooms, of then being like, what is this? Who do we need to ask a question to? And then
exactly.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot more sense than
and a lot of the groundwork for both the story, although I worked a lot with Kate to actually, because she's much better at plotting than I am. It's a weakness of mine. So I leaned very heavily on her to help me figure out plot points and pacing. But in terms of the characters and the cast, because I do have a pretty solid understanding of the period, I designed I created the town itself and the abbey itself and the characters. So I wasn't asking the writers to kind of create a historical figure out of nothing. I did all the research and consultation with people to actually get the foundation of that. So by the time a character went to someone, we had a working idea of who they were, the context that they lived in, their relationships to the people around them. And I think that took a lot of the kind of the difficulty out of like what does a person do, or like how do they sound, and then whenever we ran into a conflict where we're like, how do we represent this, we'd stop and we'd hash it out, and sometimes we'd have to go back and do some revisions, but I think for the most part it was a pretty good process.
Were you were these writers that were already at Obsidian, or did you hire specifically for this game, looking for people who had interest for the writing again specifically, who had interest in the historical context?
Kate Dollarhide I've been working with her since Deadfire, and I just like working with her. So I was like, I want her to be my writing partner, and that was the initial intention. She wound up moving over to another project because she had an opportunity. And so then we hired from outside, and I looked for someone who had more expertise in the area of the historical period and things like that. And then just good writers. So, it's one of those things where obviously being more familiar with languages, the historical context, that's helpful, but
not if you can't translate it.
You still got to be a good writer.
Yeah.
So, that was sort of the bottom line. It's just I lucked out with Zoe, especially that she was so versed in this stuff, and also actually Merton, just in his own academic background, had some training that was helpful as well. So it just worked out very well. That although that's not that uncommon in my experience to wind up working with a writer who, when they're like, yes, I have a degree in psychology or anthropology or history or something. Sometimes it's English and writing strictly, but I found a lot of humanities majors kind of spread out throughout the cast.
You said you swapped your degree. Yeah, mine was psychology first, and then I swapped to writing.
Very good.
Which is actually really helpful for a lot of character work, to be honest. There's a lot of really things that I use in the psychology that I was studying that is actually very helpful, like even building a character bio or something like that. It's
of course,
really very helpful. I guess everything is when it comes to writing. Having any different background other than writing is extremely helpful.
Liberal arts. Yes.
We do what we can.
Yes.
So in terms of you mentioned, you would come up with the town and the characters. I want to ask, because I feel like this is just such a unique game, especially in the AAA space. Did you have to pitch this game, or was this something that you were approached to pitch, especially considering you're a director at the studio? How did actually, having the discussion of it being approved come about?
Well, around the time, I had some ideas for this game around the time Deadfire shipped. Excuse me. And I was pretty burned out after Deadfire. And I wasn't sure I was ready to direct. I took a break for a while, and I had this idea for a game, but I was like, I don't know how we would do this. It's probably like a 12-person team, and I don't think a publisher is going to want to fund this.
Hence my asking.
Yeah, and I was like, and then like crowdfunding maybe, but I don't know. And so I was kind of in the slumps for a while, and I started to kind of pull out of that around the time that Microsoft acquired Obsidian, and they have Game Pass. And I thought, perhaps this would be an ideal Game Pass game. And so that's how I pitched it. So I went to my boss and I said, let me make this. It'll be a very small team, and I won't lose money. And it'll be a good fit for Game Pass. It'll be cool. But I said, I will keep it small. I'll keep the scope really controlled. And he said, sure, go for it. And I started with just my art director, Hannah Kennedy, and the two of us worked for a little while. Then we had a 5-person team do a prototype. and then eventually we grew to the final team, which was 13 people.
How long did you work on it for?
I guess I want to say like 9 months to a year in pre-production, and then about 2 years in actual production.
Gotcha. And I guess how much of that was writing? Like, would you consider that just the actual production part?
Yeah, I mean, I was doing, although we threw out all of our writing in after Vertical Slice because,
of course, as you do.
You do.
Yeah.
So yeah, production. It was pretty much the entire period of production, and for quite a while. For a while, it was literally just me, and then it was Kate and I, and then she transferred off and everything. But like I said, it was usually 2 writers, sometimes 3. And yeah, we use our proprietary internal tool set, OEI Tools, which we've been using since 2006. And it's a visual flowchart editor. It's very powerful. I love it. It's my favorite tool. And
not a lot of studios say that. So
no, yeah,
good
exactly.
On you. Yeah, a lot of those writing tools are a mess.
If there are tools.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I mean, for us doing branching dialogue, our tool is like really key to that. And yeah, in the end, we wrote, I think it wound up being just shy of 350,000 words of.
I was going to ask.
Not entirely dialogue. That's 350,000 words of text,
including the glossary and.
Glossary and yeah, all UI strings and all that stuff. So I want to say it's probably like, I think it was like 30,000 lines of dialogue.
That's a lot of dialogue.
Yeah, but it's crazy because for an Obsidian game, it's actually
that's what I was going to say.
Much.
It was like for Obsidian, it's not that much really
no,
in the grand scheme of things. It's pretty on brand.
I think it's enough for the game though. So I'm not sad that we only had 350,000.
No, it's the writing is so good. Like I'm just.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm such a fan. It's just so smart. It comes across like so well directed. I would say is that it's very clear that the vision's really consistent. And yeah, I'm a big fan. So you mentioned a vertical slice, and I want to ask this because I try to be informative on this podcast. That's the plan, and I don't think anyone's ever mentioned a vertical slice before. I guess, what is that and what does it do?
So, ostensibly, a vertical slice is done to kind of prove out the things that you're trying to do both from an experiential perspective and also to prove out your pipelines. So there are really 2 different types of goals. The experiential one is hopefully self-evident. This is the experience that we're trying to create for the players. So you want to do things in the way to create the experience that you want the player to have. So and maybe you got to squint a little bit and kind of, like, okay, that's not quite there, but people should have confidence when they see the final thing. I get what they're trying to do, and I think it's going to work for their audience. And not all audiences are the same, so you do have to consider who the audience is. And then the second part is testing out pipelines. You want to establish the way by which you actually do things on the game. And you do this in pre-production in a small team environment so that you're not burning money. You have 5 people who are really key to each department. Or in our case, it was 5. Pre-production on a big project could be 30 people potentially, but proportionally, it's a small team because you want to have everyone as close to like seeing through the same eye as you possibly can. Like, we all understand what we're trying to accomplish. We all are trying to figure out the ways in which to do it. And when we're done, we're all coming out of this with high confidence that we're doing it the way we want to do it. We're giving the player what we want to give them, and our pipelines, the way in which we're doing things, are solid. Not to say completely done, because that I don't think is realistic. You always find work and you always do things, but you can't be too wishy-washy about it. You really have to make sure that people are truly confident in what you're doing, both because that enthusiasm and confidence is going to carry them forward. And also it's going to stop them from getting frustrated because they're like, we have a pipeline, it works, instead of saying, go into production, staff up, and you're just constantly tripping over each other because you're like, God, we never figured out how to import VO, oh my God. Or like, oh, we never figured out the cutscene import, like whatever that was. So yeah, the vertical slice is it's both for the team and for external shareholders. In our case, it was the upper management at Obsidian, and then also Xbox, because we had to show to Xbox and say like, by the way, we're making this game, and then they said awesome. But the healthy way to handle a vertical slice is if you don't land, you stop and you fix those things before staffing up. That doesn't always happen, but that's the way it should work. Is that you get to the end and you go like, you know what, like the way that we present these dialogue checks, it's confusing. It's pretty bad, and it seems like a fundamental problem. Like, we have to address this before we move on. So we got to revise it, look at it again in context, and then we all got to go like, yeah, that's it, and move on. Or we never did anything with the audio pipeline. Like, it's a completely immature pipeline. We have to take a step back, do the effort to get audio in, and you can contextualize and say like, okay, this isn't final audio, but it does test the pipeline, all the data, all the everything, the tuning, the placement, everything. Again, so that you say at the end of it, okay, now we're all confident. We're not pushing this under the rug. We feel good about how we're doing things, and we're going to move forward this way. And that also applies to writing, finding character voice, establishing the cast of characters. Like, can we write this many characters? If we can write this many characters, how many nodes can we write per character per day for each person? So there are logistics there that helps you scope the rest of the game, because if you say, we're going to write in Vertical Slice, we're going to write 20,000 lines of dialogue, and you finish and it's 10,000 lines of dialogue, and everyone says, the dialogue isn't very good, like, my conversations are really short, I don't really feel like I have a clear sense of voice of these characters, motivations are kind of lacking, that's a problem. So what do? Are you going to staff up? Are you going to scope down? Like, are you going to extend the timeout? What's the solution? The important thing at that point between pre-production and production is to answer those questions without bullshitting each other, because that's where you get into real trouble.
Yeah. How long was your Vertical Slice, out of curiosity?
I think it was 9 months.
Okay.
I think it was like 9 months, maybe as long as a year, maybe 11 months. I'm kind of guessing, but that sounds about right.
Who knows?
I've had vertical slices that are way too short and we're absolutely not done, and we just roll right out of them, and it's bad.
Yeah.
Our vertical slice felt like a miniature version of our Act 1 in Pentiment, and it was pretty good. Everyone was kind of like, yeah, and there were things that we changed, but
yeah. So why did you throw things out?
Excuse me. Because we learn through the process of making. And you kind of like look back and you just see this kind of ossified pile of shit. And you don't want to carry that into the game. And I did something intentionally, which was I constructed a throwaway narrative, which was about Brother Guy being murdered. Brother Guy is not murdered, spoilers.
Yeah.
But he is a character in Act 1. And within the context of the Vertical Slice, the murder mystery was about Brother Guy, and I can't remember who all the suspects were, but I think it was Adak, Zdena, and somebody else. And so that was all throwaway, because I'm like, this is not going to be the actual mystery. This is to prove out how we do things. And then when we were done, I was like, well, this isn't the story, so we're not going to keep any of this stuff. So we did keep certain assets that we developed during that process. But
I imagine
for the most
you had
part,
your art like pretty well figured out at that point too. It's such an iconic part of the game. You had the
stylistically, like, yeah, I mean, and we worked out things. It was crazy. Like, so the first act, and the Abbey was actually the very first place that got arted out. And a lot of the monastic characters like Illuminata, Zdena, Adak were the first characters done. And as time went on, Hannah and Sujin, who was our other main artist on the project, we really had two main artists make all the art in the game, which is crazy.
Wow.
But they kept increasing. They just got better and better, and like their kind of refinement within the style got better and better. And then there was a point right near the end where like they had done a revision to the early scenes like a year ago, but they just never got around to checking them in. And it was crazy because they checked them in and it was like, wow, like I got so used to seeing it the original way that it looked. And the original way looked really nice, but their revision to it was like, holy crap.
Working with artists will never stop blowing my mind.
Yeah, it was really great. So, the thing is though, Hannah is just, I can't say enough good things about working with her. She synthesized the kind of ideas that I gave her into this cool art style, executed on it so well that right away everyone was like, awesome. And then she just kept improving on it and refining it. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why the art is like the standout thing when people are like, oh, wow.
It looks gorgeous, yeah. So obviously this game is a murder mystery. This is a pretty loaded question, I guess. How do you go about plotting out a murder mystery that, especially one that's, I don't know, 15 hours-ish or however long Pentiment ended up being to get through. Like, how do you actually plot out a murder mystery? I don't even know what that looks like. Is that like, are you still working on the writing in an act structure? Is it this person dies and then what happens surrounding this? Like, what is the process of getting that down?
Yeah, I wonder, I kind of wonder, because I don't think I did a great job plotting out the actual murder mystery stuff. Like, I feel like actual mystery writers maybe would look at this and be like, no. And part of that is naivete on my part, because I haven't really written murder mysteries before. And
same. That's why I ask. Like, I don't know how they do it.
and there were also certain things that I chose to do that are against genre convention, I think, in a lot of ways. So there is not a canonical killer. There are suspects, and you will accuse one, and they will die. And or you will accuse multiple people, and one of them will die. And at no point will we say, oh yeah, it was actually this guy. We just don't do that. There were other things that we chose to not do, which were in our vertical slice. This is a good example. In our vertical slice, we went with the old means motive alibi. And so did they have the means to do it? Did they have the motive to do it? And do they have an alibi or not for their time? And the alibi part of it, not fun. Like, because all it does is exclude people. And there were so many nodes of dialogue and so much complexity surrounding asking people where they were. And that's not really the point, because in the structure of our story, you're learning about motive primarily. And means is a little bit in Act 1. It's not so much in Act 2. But really it's figuring out who wanted to kill this person and why and what is their character. And because in the end we're saying, like, what do you think? And things like alibi just exclude people and they're not interesting. So we actually literally don't deal with it at all. We just like never address it.
So you did originally try to?
We did, and it was like, holy shit, I'm writing so many nodes and replies, like exploring this topic that is not interesting or fun.
And I guess that has to just kind of be exposition in a way, right? That has to just be
like,
I was here doing this.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I talked to this guy and the da-da-da-da-da. And look, like, again, that's a staple of mysteries. And there are games where, and that's why I don't describe it typically as a murder mystery game. I describe it as a narrative adventure that has a murder and things, because I don't want people to expect that there are like logic puzzles.
Detective, yeah.
Yeah, and there are games that do that and they do it very well, and that's the entire point, and that's not the point of Pentiment. So, the mystery is more about there's an overarching mystery that goes across all 3 acts and all 25 years, and that is more definitive and hopefully more satisfying than to the like mystery detective brain than the murders that take place along the way, which are much more ambiguous, and they're kind of torturous because they ask the player to decide who's going to die, and that's not a great feeling. And especially when you see how, especially at the end of Act 1, like how the characters die is it's historically accurate, and that's not a nice thing to see.
Pause before saying it's historically accurate. Yeah, you're not wrong. It's technically historically accurate.
So it's not a good feeling. Like, I think that, this is not about capital punishment, but like the sense of satisfaction in a detective game where you're like, I got the killer. Like, I figured it out 100%. Everyone has a parade and they clap you on the back and you're like, you're so smart. And in Pentiment, they're like, you fucking asshole. Like, like, why did you do that? And you're like, and you can give reasons, but it's like, God, that just sucked. Because that's justice in the 16th century, baby.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say, for the overarching conspiracy, I did try to lean more heavily on careful foreshadowing and misdirection, and I did look at and watch a lot of mystery films and noir, and Name of the Rose was the novel by Umberto Eco was a huge inspiration for the game overall, and that is at its heart a really engrossing murder mystery. I don't think I do the mystery as well as Umberto did, but there were some of the staples that we used just to kind of build that build the suspicion and then immediately misdirect you so that you're kind of distracted, or we give you hints but then very carefully put something in your way mentally to kind of again, like, disassociate you from kind of the truth of what's happening. And it's the same sort of tricks that happen in a lot of movies and stories where you want to keep teasing the player's mind to make them, or the reader's mind to make them think about it, but you don't want to dwell on it too much because you don't really want them to figure out. You want them to suspect, but not definitively solve. At least that's kind of how I look at it.
That's a lot to have to weigh up every scene. I feel like that it's not just like,
True.
Oh, there's a mystery. You're actually trying to make sure that you're stringing people along in a really specific way. That seems like a lot.
It is. And like I said, I don't, in retrospect, think I did a great job. I think I did an okay job. And
doesn't come across that way.
Thank you. But yeah, I think at the heart of Pentiment, though, it's less about that overarching mystery, and it's more about the relationships that Andreas has with the community. And I think if there's anything that the team did do really well, it was making the characters feel very human and believable, and hopefully get the player to really care about their lives and how they relate to each other. And the mystery is kind of like this thing that is, again, going above everything and pulling you through the story.
I definitely think, when you talk about this game being about figuring out motives, it really is about learning about different characters. And I think one thing that Pentiment's really good at is the minute that you talk to someone, the first sentence, you get a very good picture of who they are, literally from their opening sentence. People are so distinct the second you talk to them. And I wanted to ask, like, how many passes do characters go through? Did you have a bio for everybody and then kind of a writing guide or a speech guide for each of them? Because it's a lot of characters. So how do you,
it is a lot.
Make sure that you're really conveying exactly who everybody is so quickly?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I knew very early on that I really wanted a lot of characters. Part of it is because I wanted to represent a really wide section of society. I think that although I love Name of the Rose, it is about monastics. It's men. It is male monks in one specific place. And there is some international variety there, but it's monks and friars, and that's about it. And there's very little, there's like no women basically in the entire story. And the peasantry is represented in kind of this weird way. And so I was like, no, I want to show monks, I want to show nuns, I want to show noblemen, I want to show craftspeople. And I remember, I watched a lot of stuff for reference and inspiration. There is a film based on a book about a painting.
Okay.
Called The Mill and the Cross, which is about Peter Bruegel the Elder's The Procession to Calvary. And it's a beautiful Mannerist painting, and it is full of characters. And it's Christ crucified is in the scene, but it's almost like receding, and it's this enormous cast of characters. And in the film, Peter Bruegel says, my painting needs to be big enough to hold everyone. And part of that was to show everyone from every part of society. So I'm like, we're putting them all in. and so I knew, like, we're going to have a huge cast. And a lot of my initial work was less about plot and more about community, which is also, later on, I found that's how Umberto Eco started The Name of the Rose. Is he literally just started writing down a list of names of monks. And he's like, it's going to be a murder mystery. It's going to be in a monastery. And he was like, names of monks and where they're from. And then he worked from there. And so I was like, well, if we have a monastery, it needs an abbot, and it needs a prior, and it needs a cantor and a sacristan and a cellarer. And then I was like, and we have nuns, and they need a prioress and all these people. And then we have the town, and they need this and they need that. And it was for variety and contrast. And for every character, I wrote up something really brief about their physicality. I picture characters very quickly and very easily. And so I would write something very brief about what they looked like, and then kind of their vibe. It was never more than like 3 sentences. And so I have a document where it's this very big doc where it has them grouped mostly by social class, or like, if they live in the abbey or the town, and what their deal is. And so that was the foundation of it. And that helped Hannah create art, and she is so good at taking those little tidbits and interpreting them perfectly. I remember we have a character named Hedvig Bauren, and she is the wife of one of the farmers, and I think my very brief description of her was like wine mom or something, and Hannah drew a bunch of the peasant women, and without labeling them, everyone was like, that's Hetty. Like,
no way.
She just captured it so well. And then what was great about that is that reinforced, we had that picture, I think it's, for me anyway, having the physicality and the picture of the character in my mind as I write them is really helpful to me. And that, so it's kind of this cycle where I have an idea, I write it out, Hannah reinforces that incredibly, and then I'm like, okay, now I can take it and really write this character. And yeah, I tried to, and then there were cases where, like someone would start writing and I'd be like, the tone is not right there, or, and in cases we would hand off characters because, logistics, we can't all write everything. And there would be times where I'd have to come back and say like, okay, I think we kind of lost the voice here. This character doesn't speak long sentences. They're not stupid, but they don't speak long sentences. They don't use complex vocabulary. They're pretty direct, they're pretty gruff. And here, this character seems like kind of nuanced, kind of loquacious. He's using big words, like loquacious. and so, I'd say like step back and kind of, write that out and, like revise that. And I would say like the content, what he is talking about is totally what he should be talking about. And the back and forth is great, but like the actual lines themselves, he just lost his voice from the first act. So with that in mind, then the writer would go back and revise it. And, 9 times out of 10, it was like, cool, you did it.
So again, did you have a speech guide for each character? Did you have they speak in longer sentences, they do or don't use these phrases?
No, not usually. It was usually just like a few words about their personality and like education maybe.
Yeah.
And then, thankfully, it was such a small writing team and there was such a great deal of oversight between us that it was really easy to catch stuff. Like, it was very rare that someone was, not that it didn't happen, but it was rare where a person would write for like a week and then I'd look and be like, oh God, like, like this is completely wrong. Yeah. I completely lost all my responsibility over this. So yeah, it was nice because, and I don't like to encroach too much on the specifics. The important thing is distinction and character. So it's not about like this word or that word. I mean, rarely I would say like maybe do a little tweak here. But for the most part, I had a very clear picture of this is the character, this is their personality, this is how they fit into this world. But I left it to the writers to really figure out the voice for that character. Yeah. Unless someone else had already figured out the voice, in which case it's all of our responsibility to pick up what we've been given and continue with it.
Out of curiosity, do you know how many characters you have?
I believe, and this is models, I don't know if this is actual speakers, because not every character speaks, 157. So I would say of those, probably 140, well, that's a good question, because there are a lot of babies in there too.
Babies don't count.
A lot of them grow up.
Yeah.
So, but no, it's 140, and that's across all 3 acts, and yeah, that they just run the gamut, and there's a lot of characters. So,
do you think you could still name them all?
I mean, like alphabetically, no, but like
do you think that every character, or would they be one that you'd be like, who's this?
I absolutely know every character. I mean, I designed every character.
I was just curious if you could forget it, I guess. Like, is that ever a thing where like any of them just exist in the game rather than existing in your mind forever?
No.
I think I probably expected that. You have to know it so intimately to execute on directing a game, but it's still just
it's in this case, because the interconnectivity of the community is so vital.
Yeah.
Like because I think visually, if you asked me what are all the characters in Act 1 right now, I could think through every location in the game and I could tell you every character.
Not going to make you do that, but I believe you.
but that's I have to internalize that so much to understand the relationships between these characters that's I don't know, that's just part of doing it.
For sure.
I guess.
Yeah. What do you think is the hardest thing about making Pentiment, or I guess your job in general, making any of the games that you've made? What do you think is one of the most challenging things about your job?
Jeez. Oh God.
It's a fun one.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, sometimes it's motivation. Like, it can be easy to get burned out. I do think that after Deadfire, I was pretty burned out. Because the game reviewed fairly well, but it did not sell well at all. And there's a lot of criticism, and I didn't so much take it personally as like an insult, but it made me go like, God, should I even do this? Like, and so I stopped directing for a while because I'm like, I don't even know what to do. I'm glad I got to work on Pentiment because I really love the subject matter. I love the art. I love art history. My father's a sculptor. I wanted to be an illustrator. I'm colorblind, so that makes that hard.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but so I was interested in art history as a kid and growing up, and some of my partners in the past have been working artists, so I've always maintained this connection to art and history. I have a history degree. I just love it. So the chance to do this game got me really passionate about doing it, and my goals were really just to communicate my love for this and draw other people into the story, and hopefully some of that love would like wear off on people and they would also become interested in it. But I really wanted to make it very accessible, and so many of the games I've made are hard. They're hard to get into, and they're really for a very specific audience, and they're really not for a lot of people. And I wanted this to be for a different audience, and it is not for. It's one of those things where I kind of feel like in the reviews for Pentiment, and I understand why people say this, so I'm not saying I don't get it, but they're like, this isn't for everyone. No shit. God of War is not for everyone. Call of Duty is not for everyone. But there is this expectation that normal games are like real games, and that's like for like people, like everyone, but it's not really. And then ones that are kind of unusual or weird, those are the ones that aren't for everyone. But really,
everyone has a preference for everything.
Everyone has a preference for everything.
I don't really play Call of Duty. One of the most popular franchises on the planet.
And that is okay.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It's not bad. But yeah, like knowing who your audience is, or trying to at least understand who your audience is, and knowing that what you're making is going to resonate with them and really get them excited in the way that you get excited about it, I think it's really important. And I think when there are disconnects there, that can really be draining, because it's, what am I doing wrong? Or like, why isn't this landing? I just, is it me? Is it like, what is going on? So with this game, I think it was going back to the beginning, there's a much clearer sort of sense of, I like this type of game. I like the idea of this game. I love it. And then people are like, not my thing. And I'm like, cool, that's fine. And that feels a lot better to me than when I try to make something for an audience where they're like, I made it for the audience, and the intended audience says, I don't like this. I'm like,
oh yeah,
God,
yeah,
that sucks.
that's a bummer. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want that. So I guess, I know it's a really difficult thing about being a director, or at least a very important thing about being a director is, you talk about motivation. If you're not motivated, how's your team supposed to stay motivated? If you don't believe in it, how's anyone else supposed to believe in it? And I guess, a big part of being a director, from my perspective, I'm curious if you agree, is just making sure everyone's excited to make the thing that they're making.
Absolutely. You cannot, you can, but don't. You can't drag people through making a game.
Yeah.
You can't, it's just, taking people who want to be creative and expressive and who got, for the most part, there are people who are just kind of like, yep, coding away. I don't care. It's rare.
Yeah.
Most people are in games because they love games, and they love making games, and they love seeing players get excited about what they made. And if you don't buy it, or if you do buy it but you can't communicate it to the people and get them to share that, and you can't share with them because it has to be a collaboration, even if they get it and you're not letting them in to be part of the process, that is not good. They're like, okay, I guess I'm coloring his hat red, even though I think it's fucking stupid, or whatever. So you got to believe in it. You got to get people excited about it. And then you also have to take what they give back to you. You can't just be looking for a thumbs up. You got to listen to people and really take their contribution into account, because there's a lot of cases on every game, but on Pentiment, there are a lot of cases where I'm like, this is the thing I want to do. And people are like, eh. And I'm like, well, come on, like this is, I think it's going to do this. And I would explain, like, this is what I'm trying to accomplish with this. This is what I think is going to be good for the audience for this. And so talking about that, sometimes there is a disagreement about, like, is the audience going to like this, even if we do it the way that you're saying, or are they not going to like it? If you can agree on that, then maybe the execution is the problem. Then you can talk about the kind of nitty gritty. And that's usually where I step back and go like, okay, so I thought about doing it this way. Art and animation, or maybe it's art and programming or whatever, you got some problems with it. What's the deal? And they'll give some critiques, and I'll step back to the beginning. I'll say like, okay, so this is still the thing that I want to do. So if you understand that and you agree that that's a good goal, but this execution is not it because of the reasons, how can we get back to this? It doesn't have to be the way that I said to do it because you're the people doing it, but I got to get this.
Yeah.
Unless you think that this is not a good goal. And that's usually what I step back to, because when everyone gets lost in the specifics of like, we should do it this way, very often it's just individual opinions, kind of like you're just arguing about the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And there were so many times where I had an idea and I went for it hard, because I usually go for everything hard. And then, people on the team are like, hold up, not good. And I had to step back, and they were like, okay. And we would go through that process, and then they'd say like, how about this? And I'd go, okay, great, awesome. Do it. And they do it, and it was way better. We had this jar game. It's in Act 2 where you're basically shaking jars of herbs. And without getting into the details on it, it fucking sucked. Like, everyone just hated it because it was really confusing, and like the instructions weren't clear and the mechanics were clumsy. And I came back and I'm like, look, the whole thing here is I just want people, here are my goals. It's fun to shake jars. So you like, it's just fun to take your cursor and be like, la, 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 and then you get the sound, and each jar has a different sound based on the thing in it. And it's fun to hear those noises. And that's all I really want. And so you can completely redo the puzzle in a different way as long as we keep those things. Because I don't want to frustrate people. That's not the point. I don't even want them to really be challenged, because none of our mini games are really supposed to be challenging. So with that in mind, they're like, one of our programmers, Nicola, he said, how about this? And I was like, great, do it.
Yep.
And he did it. It went in. Everyone's like, that's a million times better. So, again, it doesn't really cost me anything in the end. We're not shipping ideas. We're not shipping documents. We're shipping a final game to share an experience. And it doesn't matter what I had in mind if it doesn't translate into the game. So I can keep the vision and be true to the vision while still allowing the people on the team to push back and say, hold up, go this way, back up. We got to think about this some more. And it really does have to be, you got to be enthusiastic about it. You got to be excited. You got to get people on board. But then you also have to make them collaborators in the process. You can't just hydraulically press everything down on the team and expect them to just execute it like robots.
Thinking any one person knows better than everyone else on the team, regardless of level of experience, just seems like a bad idea for making something in general.
And yet...
Maybe don't assume you know better than everyone else, and it's worth considering perspective.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I imagine there are some people who've struggled to learn that lesson for sure.
Yep.
I was in one of the Gamescom previews for this game, and you said something about, this is talking about it not being a game for everyone, or the idea of that. You mentioned that you, at the same time, thought that it may also be a game that people who didn't play games might be interested in. And I was curious if you've seen any of that. Like, have you heard or seen stories about people's parents playing or people's parents watching? And how, like, what was that like to witness, if you've seen any of that?
Yes, it was great, and it's been great, and it continues to be great. Obviously this is all anecdotal, but I've seen a number of people who are interested in history, or the art style really appeals to them, or they just like narrative games or story games, and they've heard that it's not challenging, it's not demanding. I've seen a lot of people who say, I don't normally play games, but I'm going to check this out.
That's awesome.
And some people who are like, I'm going to play this with my mom or play this with my dad.
I saw a Twitch stream of somebody playing it with their dad.
Yeah.
And, I'd be happy to send it to you if you haven't seen it. It was really, really cool, because I guess he was also had a master's in history of some kind.
Yeah, I didn't see the stream. I remember seeing that was going to happen, but then I got lost in a deluge of other things. But yeah, and like a lot of the people that I went to school with in college, I saw them who I know are not gamers, and maybe they're just being sympathetic or whatever. But they're like, I'm gonna play it. Actually, I know some of them are actually playing it. And they were like, yeah, I never play games, but they're just like, this is such a cool presentation, and I love that it's very chill and cozy, and it's mostly reading. And I've seen a lot of people who really like to play. I'm so glad we got Steam Deck verified.
That's a great Steam Deck game.
A lot of people have been playing it on Steam Deck, and they're like, yeah, this is perfect. It's just like a little visual storytelling game. So yeah, I'm very glad. Obviously, like, I don't want to exclude anyone, but I do really think that it will probably appeal to people who normally aren't they're not into Twitch games. They're not into games where there's lots of stats. I mean, that's one of the reasons why there's essentially no numbers in the game. Like, there's some stuff going on when you make dialogue checks to persuade people. There's some math there, but it's even that is abstracted. And that was another example where I had numbers in there, and there would be this big list of like +3, -4, da 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 da. And a few people on the team were like, wow, that's a huge bummer. Like, to see all that come up in dialogue. So we switched to the red and blue pips up and down. So it's like, I mean, it's essentially all still there, but it's just presented in a manner that is, it's not as kind of off-putting.
Yeah, I like that it still has the Obsidian DNA where that's concerned.
Yeah,
without
and that was,
looking like Fallout New Vegas.
Without having a bunch of numbers on the screen. Yeah. So yeah, you know, and I that was a goal, is I did want it to be accessible to more people. Yeah, at least so far, I am seeing anecdotally people just saying, yep, I don't play games, but I'm going to play this. So
did that change any components of design? Like, when designing, were you literally thinking about players who maybe haven't played games before?
Yeah, a lot of the design of the mechanics for minigames, especially, because those are all one-offs. Every single one of our minigames is a unique minigame. And we're like, these are not supposed to be challenging. These are supposed to be very simple, and they're for immersion and vibes. So anytime we had a minigame where it felt, wow, this is actually kind of difficult, we just pulled back on it. Because it's just not the point. It had to be engaging. So, for example, we had the stick breaking minigame with Attilia. I don't know if you did that. It's an optional thing.
I did.
But okay, cool. So initially, there was like literally nothing to it. It was like you just press the buttons and it would snap. And I was like, well, that's not enough. Like, that's just not engaging. So then she was like, they need to be a specific size. And that was it. So you move your fingers and you snap it. And she'll be like, wrong. And she doesn't tell you. She just says, you blew it. Or like, that's fine. And it doesn't really matter. It's just to get the player thinking a little bit more. And you only break like 5 of them or something. But it's stuff like that where it's like, this is easy. It's just supposed to give you context within the story. The spinning wool minigame is extremely easy. All that stuff. We just tried to make it really... I think the Volvel, like Prior Pharynx Volvel, is probably the most complicated, or like the card game, but even the card game is actually really simple. And ultimately, it's not a big deal if you lose all your money. It's fine. So all that stuff was just like, yeah, this is cozy time. Like, people are not sitting down at this to bang their head against the wall. They kind of just want to vibe out and enjoy the story. And the most difficult thing mentally is probably making the decisions about who to talk to and what dialogue choices to make and who to accuse of the murder.
There was a period where I accidentally made plans with 2 people. And I was like, oh, which one should I pick? And I was like actually super stressed about it. I was like, I accidentally lied to somebody. Like, it's definitely, the stress was in like the where I was going to be and when and who I was talking to, for sure.
And that's where I want it to be. I want the player to be engaged in the story, not tripped up on minigame mechanics or numbers or things like that. You know, and if they look at their choices, you know, when you go into a dialogue check, like Sister Illuminata with the book. I don't know if you tried to keep the book at the end of the...
I did keep the book.
Yeah. So you have to convince her, and some ways are easier than others. But, you know, so we show you the things, but you're then thinking back to the story moments, because it's like, you sassed her, you know, like you said something irreverent about the church, you demanded that books should all be saved, and you're like, oh yeah, I did that. I said that. And so it's still keeping the mechanics within the context of the story, rather than kind of abstracting them out into like speech 50 or, you know, like whatever.
Okay, well, I could ask you a million more questions, but we only have 1 minute left. So
all right.
My final question is going to be, what is your favorite video game in terms of writing?
Oh, geez. My favorite video game in terms of writing. Oh, man. He's a sucker punch.
Yeah, I like to leave you with an easy one there.
Yeah. Disco Elysium is very high up there.
That's my number one.
Kentucky Route Zero is also way up there. And I got to give my shout out to Scott Benson for Night in the Woods, because that was such a huge inspiration.
It makes so much sense when you say that it's
for Pentiment. So yeah, I'd say those are probably my three big ones. There are tons and tons of great.
Yeah.
I think that's what's great about narrative adventure games now, is that we're seeing a lot more just kind of writing that is, not to say that you can't have great mechanical games with great stories in them. Obviously, God of War, but but also, like when it's sort of like that's just the whole thing, is just the vibes and just the story. I think we're seeing a wider variety of stories focusing on different people and times and places. Smaller teams are able to execute on this because there's just less mechanical weight to carry, and I think that's really cool. So especially, and it's I will say one other thing here at the end, which is some people have kind of compared this to an indie game, which I think is kind of an insult to indie games, because they do all their stuff with far fewer resources.
The indie games that came out this year, dude. Cult
They're
of the
crazy,
Lamb? Dude.
There are some crazy
Vampire Survivor was like one person.
Yeah.
My God.
They do incredible things with very small teams. I had the benefit of doing this for a long time and being part of a big studio that's also part of a humongous corporation.
Yeah.
So I owe a huge debt to all the people that have struggled and continue to struggle to make indie games with incredible writing. It's very inspiring to see, like literally directly inspiring to me to see that stuff.
What a lovely end note. Thank you so much for joining me, Josh. Is there anything you want to give a shout out to, or where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter, J.E. Sawyer, and I have a link tree there and whatever. So you can go to my Tumblr or my Instagram or my Twitch, which I don't stream on very often. But yeah, I do want to draw attention to, I'm doing all the interviews for the most part for the game, and I get that, and it's nice to get attention, but 13 people made this game, and more people contributed to it. So they were all really integral to the creation of the game. When you play the game, please look at the credits and see all the work that went into it, because they all did an incredible job.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to the entire team for making Pentiment. I think it's fantastic, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much.
And
you're quite welcome.
We'll see you next time, everybody. Bye.